I'm Jill Wigmore-Welsh. If we've not met before, it's great to meet you. And the conversation that we're going to be having today is actually around having a relapse and what can trigger having a relapse, but also how your thinking, how what you're doing with your thinking can impact the way that your whole system is reacting and responding. I've shown this diagram before. It's a very simple diagram. And this is the path that most people are on. I'll draw the line here. And maybe at some point they have an episode of problems and they seem to go into remission and recovery. And then here, they're at a point where they might have a relapse. And what is the one factor that really impacts how much your thinking has on whether or not it directs a relapse or non-relapse? So what we know is that when we think, or when you think, which is all the time, sometimes there will be thoughts, and I've worked with people in the past. I remember as a psychotherapist and hypnotherapist working with somebody who was extremely obese, I mean morbidly obese. And she explained to me that she was driving down the motorway and she was overcome with this thought that she had to drive off the motorway and go and buy chocolate. And she was absolutely adamant that this was something that she could not control. She could not control the thought, and she could not control her response to the thought. So she had actually driven off the motorway, gone into the service station, bought a big bar of chocolate, eaten it, and then carried on her journey. Now, listening to this, you might say, or you might be sitting laughing, thinking, well, of course she could control that. On the other hand, you might be sitting thinking, yes, I know exactly what that feels like. Now, if you're sitting thinking, I know exactly what that feels like, and I don't know how to control my thoughts, well, send me a message. And we can maybe arrange for you to have a chat with me, and we can go through a bit of a questionnaire, and we can take it forwards. The response that she had, if we talk about this lady, the response that she had in coming off the motorway and buying the chocolate and eating it and then driving back, meant she wasn't moving in the direction that she wanted to go in, which was around losing weight. Now, some people might say that maybe she wasn't that motivated to not have that thought. Because as I imagined myself driving down the motorway, coming up to this junction, driving at an average speed on the motorway, I worked out that I probably, within, I would say 5 minutes, I could have made myself go past that junction. I could have forced myself to do it, but that's because I would have wanted to. Now, when we are wanting to change, our wanting to change is incredibly important. If what's happening is that you're having thoughts, and what's happening is that you're dwelling on those thoughts, and in the case of the person that I'm talking about, she obviously did dwell on those thoughts, and then she took action, which was her choice, and she went and ate the chocolate. Now, she was also telling me that she wanted to lose weight. So as a client, she really wasn't at a suitable stage of behavior change for me to be working with her. And actually very soon after that, we parted company because she wasn't losing weight, because she wouldn't do if she wasn't changing her behavior. Now, if you're having thoughts, and what's happening is that you're actually responding to those thoughts, whether it's creating a chain of thoughts that go one after the other, or if it's actually that you're articulating those thoughts and then you're going into them in depth, so it's a bit like a storytelling process. Supposing you've been through a relationship breakdown and you're worrying about money and where you're going to live and what might happen. When you begin to start to attend to those thoughts and really give them your attention, they then become real. They become real. So as they become real, what starts to happen is that your system responds as if they're real. So if you start to think, well, what might happen if I don't change the locks on the door? I mean, you know, the door might get broken down and I might be asleep in bed at nighttime and this might, that starts to trigger this feeling of fear. So when you're on this path, and I've shown you this, so when you're on this path and you're following along, and you start to get to certain points and you begin to start to think thoughts, which is normal, the amount of attention that you actually give to each thought can really start to impact how you feel, your low moods. So it isn't actually just the negative thought coming into your head that causes you to be depressed. It's actually how much attention you give to it and how much you notice this same thought recurring. So supposing you think once a day, oh, I'm not really good enough for this job, and you ignore it. What happens is you constantly, every time you sit down and look at a piece of work, oh, I can't do this, oh, I don't know how to do this. What happens is after a while, that cycle becomes really quite established. And we know that actually there are tools and techniques that we can train people in to enable them firstly to become aware of this tendency to attend to their thoughts and respond to them, and secondly have a different way of being. And if you've got a different way of being, then when you get to this point here, which is a bit of a crisis point, then there's more chance that you actually won't slide right deep down here. You may, let's say I won't draw another diagram, but you may have what I call a blip. So in other words, your mood goes down a bit, but it might not go all the way down. So you might start to notice that things are slightly decreasing, but what you may choose to do at that point is either to get some support or work with somebody to have some sort of measure, which again I use in my clinical practice, to have some sort of measure of how things have dropped down, and actually whether this is a point where you need to actually perhaps do a little bit of work on something, do a little bit of personal development work on whatever the issue is that seems to be causing it, and prevent one of these deep down drops. So, if you want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me through all of the usual social media channels, etc. There's usually a link somewhere. Have a lovely day. Take care of yourself. Maintain yourself. Love yourself. Look after yourself. And speak to you again soon. Take care.